Welcome to the Mountainside Podcast. Our guest for this episode is Brandon H. Wheeler. He's the Executive Director of Freedom Research Foundation. He is currently boots on the ground in Ukraine. This is not our typical Mountainside Podcast. This is solely focused on current events and our current situation in the world. Brandon is a former U.S. Marine combat veteran with a degree in political science. He's also worked on multiple anti-terrorism security teams, and I encourage you to listen to our conversation in its entirety. Brandon, thank you for joining me. Like much of the world, I'm super concerned about what's going on in Ukraine. Your boots on the ground, so I'm happy to talk to somebody that's actually there. You're joining us from what? Can you disclose where you're at exactly, or?
I won't give you the exact city, but I'm pretty far away from the fighting. I'm actually outside of Lviv, where there were 3 missile strikes today, actually.
Wow. Is that a new developing thing, or has there been strikes that far out?
Yeah, there have. A lot of the logistical support comes in from bordering countries, and a lot of the rear area there. It's kind of the biggest city in the kind of the rear area of the war. It's also where the Ukrainian opposition, when I was first here in 1991, the Rukh movement started. So historically, it's kind of the heart of Ukrainian opposition.
Let's explain, I guess, let's dive into this. Freedom Front and what you're doing there currently. And then eventually we're going to get into your background a little bit, because this is the first time that we've been able to talk. And, you know, funny enough, I've been wanting to get you in the studio. It just never worked out. And now you're in a war zone, so we're doing it there.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to be on your show. Thank you for having me. So, Freedom Research Foundation was started by its founder in 1984 at the request of President Reagan. And in the 80s, as you can imagine, we didn't have AUMF, the Authorization to Use Military Force. We didn't have this kind of expansive military, let's say, process or habit. And so as a function of that, in order to get involved in conflicts, we had to ask permission from Congress in order to do that. And the intelligence community had to justify why they wanted to go do something. So there was this obvious gap in the world back then where there just wasn't enough information. So we are not affiliated with the U.S. government in any way. We don't work for the U.S. government. We actually now don't take any U.S. government money. But the mission set is to go around the world to places of conflict, to understand the historical, anthropological, political realities that make a war what it is, and then to take that information back to Washington, back to the United States, educate Americans so they can hold their political leaders accountable and vote for people who are going to continue to carry American principles. So there's a big distinction here. You'll hear, and I correct some of my guys, they say American interests. Interests are fungible. That's completely subjective. It's a matter of opinion. What is or isn't in your interest. But principles are objective. So freedom, individual freedom, self-determination, good governance, participation in governance, those kinds of things are objective. They're what built America. They're what our Constitution outlines as the construct of what America is. And so we go around the world, look for people who share those values, who are fighting for those values, and then we try to educate them, help them, learn from them, and educate our side.
Now, does this have a certain party affiliation? You know, the country being so divided nowadays, it seems like most of these nonprofits, and I don't know if you guys consider yourself a nonprofit, but most of these organizations have some sort of political tie to entice people to come over. As where here on the Mountainside, typically it's an outdoor podcast. We don't dive into politics, and I'm right in the middle on a lot of issues, you know.
Well, first about Freedom Research Foundation, we're absolutely a registered 501c3 nonprofit research education foundation, which is one of the categories of nonprofits. So that's one thing. The second thing is, yes, it was started under the Reagan administration, and so our lineage and our heritage, you know, is associated with the Reagan administration. And what I would tell you is that I fully 1,000% believe that Freedom Research Foundation is nonpartisan completely across the board. There may be people who disagree with me because I believe in objective fact and objective reality, and I also believe that certain concepts are not a matter of opinion. Freedom is objective to me. People can disagree about a lot of things about how we should live our lives, but you can't co-opt or hijack the word. The word is what it means, and it's a metaphysical part of human existence. And ultimately, all value to me extends from individual freedom. So I believe that. I've been told by people that freedom is a bad word, that freedom means bad things. So that's their subjective opinion of it. I don't think that freedom inherently has a good or bad quality to it necessarily, but I think it's an objective fact to human existence. And ultimately, we want to try to expand freedom because somewhere in the world, people are going to have ideas, and those ideas will either be ideas that we share or ideas that we don't. And we want there to be more people in the world who share our ideas because that makes us safer in America. I always say I'm always doing what I'm doing in the interest of what I think will protect our civilization, our society, because I do think it's the most unique. I've been to 90 countries. It's one of the most unique, if not the most unique countries in the world. It's the only place, in my belief, that you can come, no matter what ethnic group, what religion, who you are, you can be an American and sometimes be a better American than the ones that were born here.
I couldn't agree with you more. This division that's currently going on in the country and all that sort of stuff, I feel like a big source of that is media outlets, right? The major media outlets. It's one reason why I started a podcast is I believe long-form conversations are a better way to kind of, I guess, engage and interact with people in general and to really hear their ideas rather than these quick sound bites. One of the things that I've noticed, and maybe I'm getting misled information, and I guess that's probably the hardest part in this day and age if you're in the U.S., depending on you don't know what's right and what's wrong coming in. I may not have all my facts 100% correct, so you can't go from just one source a lot of the time, right? Even if you are taking in your news from a podcast or a third party that's not affiliated with these big, news corporations. One of the questions that I kind of had, and I don't know if you have an opinion on this, but is a lot of the media from Russia, we've been told it's being blacked out completely, so we can't really see what the other side, what their opinions are, why this conflict is really happening, and what Russian people are being told. How are we supposed to believe what we're being informed and, and that sort of thing? And is that something that you guys dive into a little bit with Freedom Front, is combating some misinformation, right?
Yeah, it's Freedom Research Foundation, but it's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. It's all right. So I'm glad you brought that up because ultimately what you've described is exactly why Freedom Research Foundation exists, right? And so being non-government, being non-political, we are trying to educate based on facts. And what I always tell people is don't believe what I tell you, but allow what I tell you to create enough doubt in your mind to go find the answers for yourself. I say that to senators, congressmen, people on the ground. I say it to everybody because you want that critical thinking. So we'll go back to why Freedom Research Foundation was originally started. What I always say is that we have the same problem today, but as we did then, but for a different reason. Back then, we didn't have enough information. So when the founder and the people he worked with went out, they would go on the ground into Afghanistan, Mozambique, Angola, and you can read some of the stuff that he wrote in Soldier of Fortune magazine and Reason magazine about his activity in all these places to find those people. And his background was he was originally an anthropologist, an adventurer. He never worked in government, but he understood how important it was to find and understand cultures and people in order to see who shared our values. So at that time, when he would go meet with the director of the CIA, Bill Casey, or Konstantin Mingus, who was the agency's guy in the NSC, and he would give them his reports and his information and brief the president, they would be like, oh my gosh, we don't have anything like this, because there really isn't an institution in the U.S. government that goes out just to listen and collect non-government, non-partisan research. We're just trying to find out who believes in freedom. So now you fast forward. Now we have too much information. And not only do we have too much information, we have a lot of disinformation. And it's incredibly accessible. So we have the same problem. It's a comprehension problem. It's being able to process that information and then determine, like you said, how do I know what to believe? What's true and what's not? And what I always tell people is, usually the simplest answer is the right answer, but also, and so everybody has these conspiracies. I hear them everywhere. The U.S. created ISIS in the Middle East, and 9/11 was a plot by the U.S. government. Whatever. If you're gonna make a claim, you better have good fact to back it up. Not a YouTube video.
Yeah, exactly.
And you should always be skeptical of what people say, and you should do what you can. In the end, and everybody I've ever taken, from former congressmen or sitting U.S. congressman to Syria, or chairman of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, who's our treasurer, to Syria, and former Secretary of Defense to Ukraine, you name it, anybody I've taken, they'll always tell you that they had an opinion before they left, and then when they got on the ground, they had a different opinion. And the degrees of that may vary. So what I think your listeners should consider is, if you really want to understand what's going on in a place, and let's use Russia and Ukraine as an example, you really have to start at the beginning. You have to start at history, and you use the history to kind of help you understand what is the cultural memory of those people, what Richard Dawkins calls a meme, which is like a play on words of a gene. He was a zoologist and studied genetics, and he made one of the most, I think, influential discoveries or identifications in the whole anthropological world, which is that cultures actually pass memories from generation to generation. So the Ukrainian people have a cultural memory. The Russian people have a cultural memory. And then you look at the history, and you look at the Soviet Union and what they did, what Stalin did to bring ethnic Russians to Ukraine. There were no ethnic Russians in Ukraine before Stalin did that. And then you look at what happened with Crimea, and then you look at what happened, if even closer, in 2014 when Russia invaded. So you look at these things, and if you want to ever try to understand who's right and who's wrong in a conflict, you have to start with a couple objective you have to accept a couple objective things. The first thing is, every person on the planet has a right to live free to the extent that it impedes on somebody else's freedom. And that the only things that are free are people and countries. And sovereign. The only things that are sovereign are individuals and countries. And countries are only sovereign if they have the consent of the governed. The sovereignty comes from the individual. The state does not own people. The people own that state. And I think we've lost sight of that even in America to a large extent. So if we accept that, then there's the next two conditions. Just ad bellum, just end bellum. Justice at war, justice in war. So do you have a just cause to launch a violent attack? And then are you doing it in a just way? Not attacking women and children. Are you only hitting military targets? So if you take all of that, right, all of that kind of analysis, and you look at Ukraine and Russia, and you want to apply it specifically to this case, I would tell you that in my lifetime, since I've been involved in Ukraine since 1991, when I was here as a young boy, but in the post 9/11 global war on terror GWAT era, we have never had a more clear black and white who was justified and who was not. This war by Russia waged on the Ukrainians is a blatant atrocity. There's a lot of Russian disinformation coming into the U.S. on this. The Russians are deboweling and raping women and children. You look at some of the cities, they look like Dresden did in World War II, cities in Warsaw and other places. The Russians are conducting the most heinous war crimes you could possibly imagine. So not only did they not have a right to invade a sovereign state, but they also are conducting it in the most heinous way possible. The example I'll give you, this is Russia's kind of thesis of why they should be able to invade Ukraine. Imagine, we have a lot of Spanish-speaking Mexican Americans in California, right? Imagine if Mexico said, hey, we've got a lot of Spanish-speaking Mexicans in California, so I'm going to launch a war to annex California because that should be part of Mexico because there's a lot of ethnic Mexicans there. There is not a single person in America who would accept that. But that's what some people are saying Russia had a justification to do. Let's use the other claim. The other claim is, well, we antagonized Russia, right? We threatened Russia by allowing all these countries around them to join NATO, and that made Russia feel threatened. So they then invaded a sovereign state and started murdering innocent women and children. Look, anybody could make that case, right? That at any point you could say, oh, well, a U.S. carrier floating around the Pacific threatens China, and China says, okay, I'm going to invade the United States. I mean, it's beyond absurdity that it's being entertained.
You can threaten from your homeland. It's a different world that we're living in, where we have these high-speed weapons and stuff. So
exactly.
That brings a lot of perspective just in you explaining that, your mission to help convey information. Like, one of the things that's always puzzled me, and I'm excited to talk to you about this. Before I ask this question, let's go ahead and dive into your background, because this isn't the first conflict that you're dealing with, right? Like, you spent time in Syria, the Middle East, Afghanistan. Can we kind of dive into that, and let's catch the people up on your background? And I need to learn as well, just because it's the first time we're talking.
Yeah, so I grew up traveling the world. I grew up living with tribes with my father. And so I just had, it's like anything when you're a kid. If you learn a language when you're a kid, they're easier. If you learn, how to do something, play a game, a sport, you're always better at it when you get older. I remember I was in Afghanistan and Marja, and we were setting up these tribal programs to defend against the Taliban. And I remember my first sergeant came up to me. He's like, hey, sir, I don't get it. How do you know this stuff? Like, how do you understand these people and their different tribes and their families and all this other stuff? And I just told him, I was like, hey, first sergeant, did your dad, ever teach you how to do something? Did you go fishing? He's like, yeah, we fixed cars together. And I was like, this is the thing I was taught to do. Like, people and cultures and countries and governments, they look different to me. I understand them differently, even our own, than almost everybody I've ever met. And so I went into the Marine Corps in 2006, became a Marine Corps infantry officer, did a number of deployments in support of OIF, and then did OEF, worked in Operation Odyssey Dawn Unified Protector, which was the Libya war, as a ground tactical advisor to the command group. And then I was held 2 company commands, 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines Echo Company, and then I was commander of the Fleet Anti-Terrorism Security Team Pacific. So I had opportunity to command at the tactical level, combat, and then at that high operational level. So I've seen war as it's done by the U.S. in almost every variation that it can be done.
With your dad, what was he doing? Was he in the military or anything like that at that point? Or why were you overseas as a kid and seeing some of these different cultures and integrating with tribes?
So my father was the founder of Freedom Research, and so he was doing a lot of his work. He had an adventure travel business, and so he always tried to integrate that combination of adventure. He and I mean, he's absolutely a patriot and loves America, but he and I kind of approached Freedom Research from very different angles. He came because he thought the greatest adventure of his time was to try to defeat the Soviet Union, or at least assist in helping the president do that, which is a pretty cool adventure. And but for him, it was doing something great for his country, but it was the experience. For me, it was, I came out of the military incredibly bitter. I was very upset that I felt like we had a lot of patriotic people. We were the best trained military force to ever walk the face of the earth. And we were just this big, blumbering bureaucracy who had, these politicians directing us in all kinds of different directions with no end in sight, losing American lives, losing American dollars. And that wasn't the only option, right? There were better ways that we can defend our country by understanding the operating environment, having people pay for their own stuff and fight their own wars, and we can help them. But that doesn't mean we need to do it or we need to risk our lives to do it. It may be in some cases on some level. But I guess when I got out, I realized that I wanted to maintain the commitment that I made, the oath I made to support and defend the Constitution. It's what's in my blood. It's what I believe against enemies, foreign and domestic. And I felt like this is the best way I could do it. So I immediately went back in countries and started working and understanding and trying to learn so I could educate people to make better decisions.
Yeah, I wish that we were taking your approach from a military front a bit more, and I'm glad that you're out there doing it. And one of my next questions, or what I want to circle back to, what I was going to ask before we kind of caught up on your background, is, there's an influx of money that's just pouring into the region of Ukraine currently in these past wars or conflicts, whatever you want to call them. There's been an open invitation for war fighters to come in, no matter what their values are, with all this money pouring into the country, all these weapons. How do you determine where those are going and if they're getting into the right hands? I'm sure, some of these outside people that are coming into a conflict that's not directly Russia or Ukraine, for example, or outside of Afghanistan, have some other agendas. How do you kind of piece all that together and digest that information and hope that somebody's being truthful in what they're telling you?
Yeah, this is not a new problem, right? As you kind of said, it's something that, but I would say Ukraine is incredibly unique in this problem for a myriad of reasons. You've seen just the amount of support globally for the Ukrainian people, and I think Zelensky is probably one of the most famous, if not the most famous, world leaders right now for that reason. And so I'm actually quite close to this problem set because it's a big concern from our perspective with respect to, okay, so you got a war right now, but what happens next when you have all these battalions and people? I mean, 25,000 AKs were handed out by the mayor of Kyiv to people on the streets. They have no idea where those weapons are now. And so you can just imagine how crazy that could get and things like that. So I've met with the Deputy Minister of Defense responsible for this and Deputy Minister in other ministries who are kind of responsible for all these issues. And I've met with the Polish government about this issue. And so one of the things that we're in the process of doing is to help assist in building a digital tool we can provide them from an education research standpoint that they could use if they decide to be able to try to manage this kind of stuff. But now a lot of that stuff is just gone and out there. So this is a conversation I have throughout the military and with the other people that I meet. Ultimately, what it really comes down to is I think there's a huge lesson learned here. You never want to try to arm, train, and fight the war that you're fighting, right? You want to have all of that training and equipment in advance. And so obviously it's too late for that. But what we want to see is we want to see a very strong connectivity between the political leadership and the Ukrainian people to say, this is why we're fighting this war. It's not just to fight Russians. It's to preserve the territorial and the cultural integrity of the Ukrainian people. And the leaders of Ukraine need to understand that obligation, that responsibility comes from the Ukrainian people. One thing I think people who know Ukraine will understand this, but there have been a number of revolutions after the collapse of the Soviet Union in Ukraine. And the reason for that is because the people were not happy with the way the government was behaving. And so they did not have the consent of the governed. Right? It's not as simple as just having an election when you have a lot of problems within your government. I think what's also really important to understand, and you'll hear a lot of this, like, oh, Ukraine's corrupt, Ukraine's corrupt, Ukraine's corrupt. I think you have to put everything into context, right? So I was meeting with some special operations guys in Poland, and one of them was a Ukrainian-born guy who went to America when he went to high school and then joined the Army Special Forces. So he has a thick Ukrainian accent, but he's as American as you or I are. And he was really kind of frustrated with the government and the leadership and stuff like that. But I asked him a simple question. I said, can you name one person who has done more to get rid of corrupt people or corruption than Zelensky since the collapse of the Soviet Union? And he said no. I said, okay, so what are you comparing him to then? Because, he's doing better than anybody else you've had. So I think when you look at Ukraine, you have to understand after the collapse, the construct of the government was designed by the Soviet Union to control people. So even though the Russians were gone, the new Ukrainians that occupied those jobs basically ended up business as usual. So be very specific. The Ministry of Interior controls all the secret police, all the national police, all the border guard service, and all of like the National Guard. That's hundreds of thousands of armed people. So no matter who you elect to president or prime minister, that guy has a lot of power in a country where they don't have, checks and balances the way we do, and they don't have division of power. So you've given all that power, and that was because that was the way designed by the Soviets. And then when the Ukrainians took over the government, Ukrainians just started doing business as usual. And you see the same thing in Afghanistan. I was in Afghanistan a couple days before it collapsed. 3 people destroyed that country: Hamdullah Mohib, Ashraf Ghani, and Fazli, and they were stealing millions, if not hundreds of millions of US dollars. And if you or I did that, we'd be in jail. But nobody arrested these guys. So all of that loss, all of those years, because of 3 corrupt people ultimately that failed. And also us failing to hold them accountable and failing to build something that could be sustainable without us being there.
Yeah, and I think that's one of my biggest fears with this is it doesn't seem like there is that sense of urgency to hold these guys accountable or hold Russia accountable or hold, even if I'm sure that there's some war crimes that are happening on the Ukrainian side as well, right? So you got to hold both parties accountable.
Yeah, I mean, look, we always have to put I am a big advocate of we shouldn't hold people to a higher standard than we hold ourselves, right? So the question the question isn't, is there a war crime? Is there accountability for that? Because we've had Abu Ghraib, we've had, bombings of non-military targets. I mean, look at the last thing that the administration did in Afghanistan, and it was determined that those were civilians in a car. I mean, that's a war crime, killing innocent civilians in a car. So, and that's my understanding. I mean, I didn't dive into it, but what I read was that there were a lot of civilian targets in that car. Anyway, the point is, not is the crime being committed, but is it being held accountable? And so I think this is really where it goes. Ultimately, without any doubt, Ukrainians have a just cause. Russians do not. Now we're talking about conduct. It's a scale, right? The Russians are, even today, when they shot those missiles into Lviv, they hit a train station. 9 women and children were killed. I mean, they're raping and murdering people, dead bodies left in the streets as they go through cities. So the level of atrocity we have not seen. Even ISIS could not conduct that kind of atrocity, right? So yes, it's unbelievable that this is happening. And really, I'm not going to say the world's silent, but we are not giving the Ukrainian military what they need to win. We're giving them just enough to not lose completely. And there's a big difference. And I think that's a real tragedy. But, yeah.
How does that affect with all these weapons and everything coming in and our support and support from, other countries and NATO specifically? How does that impact neighboring countries and that sort of stuff to Ukraine? Is that something where people are out on the outsides of that and kind of watching that and getting, outside perspective from these other countries like China or Sweden or, just in general? I mean, there's a lot of countries condensed in that part of the world, and they're super close together.
Ukraine shares, I think it's 5 borders with different adjacent countries, and then, of course, the Black Sea. So certainly there's a lot of concern with that. I, once again, want to put things in perspective, right? So train, man, and equip Syria, train, man, and equip Iraq, train, man, and equip Afghanistan, and then you have Libya war, where we didn't really train, but we did equip.
Right.
In any event, all of those are far greater risks of American military operations kind of allowing weapons to just go places they shouldn't go. And I could give you tons of examples. With Ukraine, it is a government. It does have a military structure. It does have ministries of defense. They are receiving and trying to account for this stuff. So I think on the scale of the conflict, there is a very low threat for weaponry and stuff to really leave the country as much as compared to those others. So an example, in Iraq, the Hashd-e-Shabi, which is an Iraqi It's an Iranian-backed Iraqi militia that was started to fight ISIS by Sistani. They used M1 Abrams to attack the Kurds, who were our best friends, right? They were using laws and 249 Golfs to attack Kurds who really fundamentally share our values. So we've seen far worse than I think we're going to see in Ukraine. The Ukrainian people and the government and the military here are really, I think, far more responsible and cognizant of the threat that stuff coming in happens. Certainly big stuff. Like, they've got it under control. Where the risk really is internally, right? And when you have individuals with weapons or individual units who have different political agendas, or individual brigades that have political parties, which is the case. So that's the stuff that's scary, is that, okay, they defeat Russia, or at least stop Russia. Now they have an internal fight just amongst themselves, which Russia would love to use by supporting different people to fight each other. So I think that's the biggest threat more than anything else.
And a lot of it comes down to communication and the information that they're being fed, correct? I mean, once you make an alliance, how do you distribute that and make sure that everybody's on the same page, and not, when they go to spread it to their counterparts, that they're not misspreading information or inflating it?
Yeah, once again, I mean, the kind of issue that you're describing is a much larger issue in, say, like Northeast Syria, where we have a team where you have Arabs, Kurds, and Christians who are really not a formal military. They're like kind of a militia built into a military, and they don't have like normal, basic training and rank structures like that. Ukraine has all of that. I mean, they have special forces, they have National Guard, they have Border Guard. They have all these apparatuses, and they're very well developed. I mean, the National Police at the checkpoints, they wear body cams. So it's like not that central, like African or Central Asian, Middle Eastern kind of, trained, man, and equipped disaster that could occur. That being said, yes, I think that this ultimately requires leadership. So what we're seeing when the war started is that mayors and governors kind of became area commanders just because of the reality of the war. And so all of these different functions, these different units, ultimately had to report to that governor. It's not really dissimilar to if we had a war in America. Governors have the National Guard. They have the ability to use U.S. forces if they request them, stuff like that. So there's a little bit of that going on. It's not formal like our system, but it's just a reality of being invaded. And so ultimately, the onus is on these mayors and governors and the president, the prime minister, and these military officers to put the sovereignty and the culture, the protection of their culture, before anything else, right? And that at any time they're going to jeopardize protecting their nation and their historical, crazy, amazing lineage they have. In jeopardy, they have to work together to do that, and they are responsible to the Ukrainian people to do that. So they need to be the ones to make sure this doesn't go bad in the end.
It makes a lot of sense. Can I ask your personal opinion, because your boots on the ground? I don't know how long you've been there, but do you really see that this conflict's going to escalate, or do you think it's on the de-escalation? I mean, it's hard to tell or hard to predict, but personal feelings, I think there's a lot of people with some unrest and trying to figure out what's going on, and without actually being there and seeing it and knowing all the parties involved and all that sort of thing, I think it's a really hard thing to try to figure out from thousands of miles away.
Yeah, it's true. So I wasn't planning on coming to Ukraine, to be totally frank with you. I've been keeping in touch with the Ukrainian issue, and we really, Freedom Research, I met with the last Interior Minister, Arsen Ivankov, and I saw him as like the last thing in the way of democracy really being able, and they needed leadership. They got Zelensky, so they got that part. But Zelensky got rid of Ivankov, who controlled all those different apparatuses that I was telling you about. And so I've never really seen a way that Freedom Research could really be successful in Ukraine, or assist, because there was just that there has to be space in the political structure for change, and you need either leadership or a different structure. Wars do that. And so when it kind of happened, I was like, well, I don't really know. And then I got a call from one of our senior advisors, former Secretary of Defense Chris Miller, who, if you don't know him, is absolutely one of the most incredible human beings I've ever dealt with. I mean, 27 years, he's in the invasion of Iraq, invasion of Afghanistan, had a director of the counterterrorism center, and then, of course, Secretary of Defense, and just humble guy. And so he called me up and he's like, hey, I just feel like this is the most important conflict of my life. Like, how do we get in this? What do we do? And so I immediately got on a plane to come do an assessment, kind of initiated all of my old relationships on the Polish side and the Ukrainian side, a lot which go back to my father's era, and I had my own as well, and then just went into Kyiv and started meeting with the government to try to assess what was really going on. What was the facts of this war? Kind of the questions you're asking me, I had to answer for myself before I could figure out if we could do anything. Was this just two bad guys duking it out on a dark corner alley, or was there good in this war? And I immediately came back understanding everything that I've told you about the just war that Ukraine is fighting against these evil Russian invaders. So, I think, when I took a look at the conflict and wanted to understand how we could play a role, I identified that really there was a significant lack of understanding about what was going on. So the question is, did I see this war escalating or de-escalating? And I think there's a couple of conditions to that. And I'll tell you, a lot of the pundits, on all the TV stations were saying, oh, Russia's coming. And what we realized is that they can't fight, they don't want to fight, and they have a lot of people and they have a lot of weapons, and so they can hurt and do terrible things. But they really have shown they cannot combine air to ground movement. They can't coordinate it. They can shoot missiles and they can put guys on the ground, but you're not going to be able to take a country that has the will to fight the Ukrainian people do. So my prediction is essentially that in the next 30 to 90 days, the battlefront will kind of stall. The Russians will kind of hold the land that they're on, and then the international community will come in and say, oh, okay, stop fighting, guys, make a deal. And then, let's say 14, it's 22 now, so call it 8 years from now, there will be another war, and Russia will try to take over more. I think that somehow that's going to end up being where it is. I think that entire time the Ukrainians are going to continue to resist. It won't be the same type of war that we're seeing now, but there will be a resistance, an insurgency of sorts in the areas controlled by Russians, which is what essentially, there was always fighting since 14 in the areas that Russia controlled in Ukraine. What I would like to see happen, and what I think should happen, if Americans believe that we are the embodiment of the Constitution, of freedom, of democracy, of individual rights. Because remember, all those words on that paper, the Constitution, they don't mean anything if there aren't people living that every single day. And it's not the government. It's not the land, right? The American people are America. And they embody the spirit and the culture of what makes America such an incredible country that it is, and unique that it is. And so if we believe that, then we should be pushing our government at every level to support those who share those values. And I can tell you without a doubt in my mind, the Ukrainian people share those values. They believe in freedom. They believe in self-determination. They want to have their own government and their own way of life, and they want to be left alone. And they certainly don't want their government in their business any more than we do. The government is not there to be in our business. They're there to create a place where states don't fight each other and people don't invade us. And they've certainly, I think, gone beyond that remit. But my point is that Americans and the American government should be giving the Ukrainian everything they need to defeat these evil atrocities and to push Russia completely out of Ukraine. And then they should join NATO. Because as a sovereign country, they should be able to determine who they want to be party with, who they want to join, right? If they want to join Russia, then join Russia. Clearly they don't. But if they want to join the West, then join the West. Who are we to say, no, you can't join because Russia might get upset? That is coward talk. It is cowardly speaking.
That's not what we were founded on either. I don't believe, and I you said it best. It's following that, and I think that we've lost sight of that here in America a little bit. From what I'm seeing from an outside perspective, is that there's just all this division, and it's not so much about what America was founded on, right? Like, obviously, you're going to have family conflicts, and if you look at America as a family, right, you're going to have a conflict with your brother or sister at some point, right? Especially at a young age. But the common goal of family should always be there, and I just feel like that's something that's totally getting dumbed down and lost and being silenced by a lot of these places, or these media outlets, including social media, our own, and I encourage people to get a second news source, or to really actually just ask a question and try to find out the answer instead of just listening and forming an opinion, and I think that's one thing that's really opened my eyes in the last couple of years, is really like, okay, I like listening to these people. I listen to them daily. This is where I'm getting my news information from. But at the same time, you have to question that. And I think that's been one of the best things about podcasting, is talking to people like you and it's made me form different opinions. So I don't think that you can do it in a tweet. I don't think that you can do it in a DM. I mean, we were messaging yesterday, text messaging back and forth. It's not the same as sitting here and talking to you, and it makes you form different opinions and have different. I've completely 180 before on a podcast on my opinion on something.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to that axiom I told you before. Like, don't believe a word I say, but allow it to create enough doubt in your mind to go find the answer for yourself. That's all I'm asking. I don't care if you believe me or not. It's almost irrelevant to me. Just don't be that person who accepts things at face value. Don't be that person who just assumes because a guy I like or a group of people I know say one thing, then I should believe that. It's sheep thinking. And I don't think that's the spirit of America. So that's what the Chinese do. That's what the Russians do, the Iranian, the Persian parts of Iran. So, and anyway, I think the other thing is we saw a huge victory in this space, right? The Joe Rogan victory with Spotify. Spotify stood up for him. He said something he shouldn't have said. I don't even know what it was, or if he shouldn't have said it, but he thinks he did. He shouldn't have. And so he apologized and move on. That, this whole trying to cancel freedom of speech. And I think this is one of the things that really infuriates me about everything, is that I really learned that I did not defend people who agreed with me. I had defended people's rights to be able to disagree with me or have whatever opinion they want. So for me, if you say I don't agree with you and I want to be, and this is one of the things where I think we've really failed in America, when you understand how the founding fathers created our country, you have to read the Anti-Federalists and the Federalist Papers, because states, we're not the federal America. We're the United States of America, and those states are really the cornerstone of our governing structure. So the most important people should be the governors and the state assemblies. They should be where all the focus is. They should be where all of the election attention goes, not the federal government, not the President of the United States. They're supposed to be like basically placeholders to make sure we don't get invaded and states don't fight each other. In my opinion, there should be a free market economy of political ideas in America. And if you want to be the socialist state of Connecticut and pay 80% tax and go live there, do it. Be American, go do it. You want to be the free state of Texas and live in Texas and pay no tax, do it. And if you like that lifestyle, having a government job and getting very little money and living in Connecticut, working for the government or whatever because you're paying so many taxes, then do it. I don't care. It's not my business. I don't have to live there, but you're still American.
That's part of freedom.
Right. And we should create more of it, not make less of it.
Agree 100%. What does it look like? Say this conflict ends in the next 30 days, and I don't know how much you're involved with this after the fact, but what does it look like rebuilding a Western country in 2022? How does that even start?
Yeah, I think this is a really important lesson we need to learn from all of our stuff in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and all this other stuff. And Americans are incredibly generous people. We donate per day more money than any other country in the world to any cause, right? Domestic or internationally. And so we have this kind of, we are the wealthiest country in the world and this very powerful military. And so we have this desire to just like send money, send money. It never goes well. It never helps, really. Now, I can understand some immediate stuff you can't wait for. But ultimately, if America wants to help Ukraine, bring American businesses. Nobody has an economy like us. Nobody has the experience we have in business or the diverse sectors that we have. I worked for a short stint in international business. And you go to the United States and you look at just like refrigeration companies. We've got like, I don't know, 30, 40 different companies. You go to another country, they might have one or two max, right? So we have this incredible innovation. We should have an incredible manufacturing industry. We should now, especially post-COVID. But anyway, we have so much to offer the Ukrainians. So my policy would be go to Ukraine, start a business, have a Ukrainian partner, make money together, and reinvigorate their economy and grow it to be 10 times what it is now. And we've seen good examples of this in Poland and Hungary post-collapse of the Soviet Union. There was something called the Enterprise Fund. The U.S. appropriated a couple $100 million and rebuilt those countries, but the money didn't go to governments. It went to a private equity firm, and they paid the money back to the U.S. government. And that model worked. Then it went to the State Department. Yeah. Then it went to the State Department, and they did 23 programs, and a bunch of bureaucrats who'd never, made a profit in their life, all the programs failed because they don't understand it. And I'm not trying to be mean or just disparaging, but it's just a fact. They're not business people, so they shouldn't try to do business.
No, that's a great point. And on an individual level, like one thing that I'm seeing is there's all these nonprofits that you can donate to. There's all these charities and stuff like that to help Ukrainian people that have popped up. You just explained like throwing a bunch of money at it is not the best alternative. From a personal standpoint or on an individual standpoint, what is your opinion the best way to help organizations like yours? Not only that, but just the overall conflict.
Yeah, look, I think giving to the government of Ukraine, and we can provide your listeners with a list of the appropriate entities, of making sure that money will go to the right places. There are some international NGOs. Our chairman is also the chairman of a medical in-kind nonprofit foundation called Brothers Brother, which is based out of Pittsburgh, and they give medical equipment. They're very, very good. They do a great job. There are a lot, and there's also a lot of waste and kind of people using this opportunity to raise money. So I think you do have to be careful of that. I think we should. You just gave me an idea. I should go to my team and we should list some NGOs that we know we've seen on the ground are doing the right thing. I've heard of Save Our Allies has got a great reputation. They're a bunch of veterans who are doing a lot of evacuations and stuff like that. So I think one of the things you got to think like, where do you want your money to go and what do you want your money to do, and then find the right NGO for that. But yeah, it's got to be a word of mouth thing on some level.
I think that just paying attention to it, and like I said, asking those questions, right, and trying to come up with your own answers, I think is key, or talking to somebody. If you can't pick up the phone and talk to somebody or whatever, I think that you should at least get some homework in before you just throw your money out, at a cause or something like that. There's so many out there nowadays. It's insane.
Look, I'll tell you, we talk about Ukrainian corruption. I know of two instances. A U.S. defense contractor who stole $12 million from the Ukrainian government in this time of all things, through this really intricate process, and provided no material for it and just is holding the money hostage. And then another Ukrainian American who took donated material and then sold it to the Ukrainian government, right? So, this stuff happens across the board, and you really do have to be careful. But I would say, right now what the Ukrainian people need is they need the U.S. government to provide them rotary wing, close air support capable aircraft. They need to provide them with the training or advisory capability to actually run this war and coordinate ground-to-air movement. And they need to be able to control their skies on their own. Everybody talked about no-fly zone, no-fly zone. I was part of implementing a no-fly zone in Libya. And a no-fly zone is only as good as it's enforced, right? There's no magical bubble you put over a country and planes can't fly in. The plane's going to fly in. It's what happens after the plane flies in. So they need the surface-to-air missiles and the air counter-air capability to make sure the Russians can't drop bombs any longer. And with that, the prediction I gave you would be very different. The Ukrainians can push the Russians completely out of Ukraine if they have that fixed-wing, rotary wing capability, and if they have that surface-to-air capability. The Ukrainian people will win.
I feel so bad for all those people and what they're going through, and I can't believe how they've banded together and what they're doing, and I couldn't agree more with you. We need to support them 100%.
The spirit is amazing. I mean, when you see the unity of the people and, all of these people at these checkpoints in the middle of the night, making sure that people aren't going through their villages and stuff. I mean, gosh, I feel like if somebody invaded America, it's what I would see. Everybody's got their hunting rifle and their private checkpoint, and they're being polite and kind and not abusing people. And yeah, there's been incidences, of course, that's human nature, right? But at the same time, I mean, how the Ukrainians have banded together to defend their sovereignty, to defend each other, their fellow Ukrainians, it's unbelievable. It gives you a lot of hope for humanity.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. If somebody came to you, Brandon, and and said, "Hey, we want you to be the middleman. We want you to broker a deal," what would you say to get that started to end this conflict? I guess, and I know that's a tough question, but
wait, a deal between
Russia and Ukraine.
That's funny. What a bizarre question. I've actually been
I'm
asked
way
this
out
question.
there, Dan.
No. The reason why it's bizarre is because somebody actually asked me this question. Yeah, look, we used to have this saying in America: we don't negotiate with terrorists, right? And we were really proud of that. Like, we don't negotiate with terrorists; we kill terrorists, right? Why didn't we negotiate with Baghdadi? Why didn't we sit down with Baghdadi and say, "Hey, buddy, we got it. You have one view. We have one view. We understand you want to rape and sell women and Yazidis and, spread the word of Islam using violence. We get it. That's cool. Let's come to terms," right? Would you accept that?
No.
No. And so there is no negotiating with Putin. Putin is a terrorist. He just happens to be a president of a country which he's never actually not been the president, right? Like, he's just always been president since basically the collapse of the Soviet Union or shortly thereafter. Right. So I think what's also important to understand is that the Russian people are just as much hostages in this whole thing. They're intellectually brainwashed. They're intellectually isolated from the world. The little protesting they tried to do, the FSB probably killed their families and threw them all in prison. You saw there were some protests going. There is opposition in Russia. Yeah, absolutely. So my policy with Putin would be we don't negotiate with terrorists. And if we had stepped up to Putin in 2008 when he invaded Georgia and said, "Listen, if we had he's a bully and he's a terrorist. You got to shoot terrorists and punch bullies in the mouth." If we had punched Putin in the mouth and said, "You don't invade Georgia," who, by the way, was our partner in Afghanistan and gave forces to fight the Taliban in Afghanistan, and drive down what is George Bush Highway to go sack Tbilisi and put a puppet in there. You don't do that. And if you do that, we're going to break your country up into a bunch of parts. I don't think there is a future in the world for Vladimir Putin, and the only future Russia has is if they reform and change their entire government. And we need to support those within Russia through information operations, psychological operations, covert operations, to help create a Russia that belongs to the Russian people, not to the oligarchs and the authoritarians of the Soviet era.
Yeah, it's an entirely different mindset and stuff that I don't think a lot of people look at from an outside perspective. And thanks for sharing that, because I think it's super important.
Yeah, no,
Man, it's a tricky situation. Diving back into your background and spending all that time in Afghanistan and Syria and stuff like that, and our withdrawal out of Afghanistan, do you anticipate, we were kind of talking about rebuilding for a minute. Do you anticipate us going back there to fix it? Because I feel like the way that we left was not the right way to do it, right? I mean, I might be a dumb mountain kid, but I got common sense. Like leaving millions of dollars of weapons behind and just pulling out. What's your take on that? And you were involved pretty heavily on some of that.
Yeah, I mean, I was there literally days before the last flight went out, and I had met with, Hamid Karzai, Mohammed Atanur, tons of people working inside the palace, and really piecing together what happened. And I had friends, Afghan friends, that had asked me to go do an assessment and kind of understand it. I always thought, I'm like, you guys have the U.S. government and this huge military complex there. What am I gonna do? You know what I mean? It's like they've got it. Like, don't worry about it. And I had no idea how bad it was, how rotten the whole thing had become, and how we had become complicit in the whole in allowing it to happen. I mean, Fazli, Hamdullah Mohib, and Ashraf Ghani, the president, the national security advisor, and the head of the Afghan president's office, should have all been arrested years ago, when they were, taking sexual favors for positions of government and stealing money. And Hamdullah Mohib sent 100 of his cronies out to 100 districts across the country. I think there's so many broken narratives. Americans thought, the Afghans didn't want it, so they lost 60,000 lives in the fights in Afghanistan over 60,000. That's insane, and that's wanted it more than anything. But we built this construct, this central government that was incredibly corrupt, incredibly inefficient, and also very much dependent on our presence, right? And so if you look at Afghanistan, right, you build countries from the ground up. You don't build from the top down. You don't start in the center of the government. You start at the bottom of the government. You work your way up. So if I had a do-over in Afghanistan, I would have gotten rid of the Taliban, and I would have never even gone to Kabul. I would have gone to each of the districts. I would have gotten with the people, said, okay, you got school, you got medical, you have your own election, you elect your own governor, you're good. Like, that's it. If you guys want to go together and create a central government in Kabul, do it. But our preconceived notions that because somehow it became a country a couple hundred years ago, it has to stay the way it is, for whatever reason, whatever justification they have, it's chaos, countries are going to break apart. 90% of the countries, maybe more, around the world were arbitrarily created. They weren't deliberately created with a coherent structure and a coherent way to exist. They were just kind of one empire, then turned into a different era and rebranded and reled and reconquered, in one way or another. So, Afghanistan could easily be a fully functioning democracy. To his credit, President Trump had a real plan to leave Afghanistan. It wasn't what you saw happen. I mean, he was, and I know this firsthand because our senior advisor, Secretary of Defense Chris Miller, took the plan to meet with the commander Scotty Miller in Afghanistan and briefed it to him. So it's not I'm not saying that like it's I know for a fact that that's the case. And this thing that happened in Afghanistan was such an embarrassment to us as Americans, and it just spat on all the lives that we lost there. The only way that you can justify the human loss, forget the money, the human loss, is that place becomes better. We could have all those people back and the Taliban would still be in charge. So for me, it's unfinished business. And if I was going to do it again, I would, first of all, the Taliban's for sale, by the way, because they're incredibly corrupt. This whole like holier than now
100,
Muslim,
yeah.
it's nonsense. And so go in, get rid of the hardliners, buy off the Taliban, and say, look, go home. Nobody's going to bother you unless you committed some war crime, rape, murder, whatever. And then go into the districts, support the local district governors, and then say, listen, the district governors should be from the district, not people that sent from Kabul to come rule. I mean, imagine if somebody in America sent the governor from D.C. to your state. Nobody'd listen to that guy. Nobody'd accept that. And that's what was happening in Afghanistan. So we should never try to build a government the way we should look at the way America was built. We were colonies before states, states before a federal government, and that we went through this process. And you can't become a country. Let's say, I always say democracy is a behavior before it's a form of government. You know, you've got to create that democratic behavior, and that collective society, they have different portions of their behavior that is democratic. If a tribal leader is failing a tribe, they will kill him and leave him in a ditch. Now, the threshold for that's pretty high, and I'm not saying that's the right form of democracy, but ultimately that's rule by the people is what democracy means, right? So what I'm saying is you want to reinforce the good democratic parts of collective societies in Afghanistan. You want to empower them to have a say in their way of lives. Pashto tribal leaders in Helmand told me, all I want is my son to be an engineer. I want them to be a doctor. I want them to be educated. They're telling me that. They can't even read or write. Yeah. So, yeah, Afghanistan for me is unfinished business. It absolutely shouldn't have gone that way. It was bureaucracy at the worst level in the U.S. military and the intelligence community. And people will tell me, like, hey, man, you know, we had it under control. You know, we had the Taliban at bay. Fine. But even if you say that.
No, that's bullshit. We have so many mutual friends that are active military still or, you know, former military, and I'm sure you have a lot more than I do. And I talk to these people firsthand on a regular basis, and that is not the case.
I agree with you, but I was going to say, even if that was true, what does it matter? Look at the scoreboard. You know what I mean? Right. It's over. Game's over. You lost. So even if you say that you had it under control, who cares? You know, your team got pulled off the court at the last quarter. You lost. Like, so what? You know, so I think we're so consumed with process. We're so consumed with rice bowls, you know, what state wants, what the IC wants, what DOD wants, what Congress wants. And we're not looking at, hey, we need to do this in a way that doesn't cost. By the way, we should have never spent $1 in Afghanistan. Americans should be richer for Afghanistan, not less wealthy, because they have tons of mineral resources. We could have brought all of our expertise. We could have done a good business deal, made money, and they can pay for their own government. I don't remember the part in our history where they dropped bags of cash and they're like, hey, build your government. I don't remember that. So why are we doing that in other countries? It does not work.
And it commonly just keeps happening over and over again. And I think that that's one thing that could seriously cripple what we've built.
It is. No, it is crippling it. It is crippling it. Yeah, of course.
You know, to make an analogy, it's like giving a drug addict money to solve his problem. That doesn't solve the problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's just, I don't know.
100%.
We have some serious stuff we need to look at, and I'm really thankful for what you're doing, and I really enjoyed talking to you. Unfortunately, we got to wrap this thing up here in the next few minutes. You know, if somebody wanted to get involved with you, there's so many former military guys out there. There's a lot of people that share your same values and would like to be involved in something like this. Are you guys building a team? Or is there any sort of way that somebody could contact you or be involved with what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we're a pretty small organization, but we have been growing kind of exponentially, and we get, you know, asked more and more to get involved in different things. So I guess the best thing is, you know, we have a website. Email us on the website. Certainly on LinkedIn, you'll see people who are associated with us. You can reach out to any one of them and ask us to get in contact and talk to them. What I would tell you is that I fully believe that there are tons of people throughout the U.S. government who think just like you and I, who agree with this, and they don't have a place to go. They don't have a place to go to contribute. You know, how do they still use their skill set, use their understanding, use their experience to try to still defend America? And we give them that place to go, and we always look for opportunities to use that. Obviously, there's no money in freedom, right? So if you're going to come here to do it for the money, don't. But if you want to come here to enrich your life or do something you believed in or fulfill that oath that I feel like I try to do every day and honor those that we've lost because we can never get them back, absolutely, I'm interested in having a conversation. We're looking for, company partners, individual partners, institutional partners, and I see myself as one of many leaders of an intellectual revolution of how we need to rethink how we conduct national security and foreign policy as a nation state.
Brandon, I commend you for doing it, man. This has really been really insightful. I'd love to talk to you again. I know that you're extremely busy, and I can't thank you enough for carving some time out in the current situation that you're in the middle of a war zone,
No,
so
it's my pleasure.
Yeah, no, I really do appreciate it. And, I'd like to also thank Luke the next time you talk to him for setting this up. Luke, we've had on the podcast before, so shout out to you, Luke Pilgrain. Really appreciate the connection.
Yeah, Luke. I was just going to say, Luke at Clandestine Media Group, they're incredible. I mean, what they do, they are, such an incredible team, and they understand social media and marketing, and they've operationalized it. I mean, the stuff that they've even been able to do for us, I was like, whoa. Because you talk to tons of marketing companies, and you're like, these guys just want my money. And Luke's like, no, I don't want any of your money. I'm going to go do it, and then you can pay me later. And I was like, whoa, this is amazing. And he just delivers consistently. He's got such an incredible reputation. And he was just telling me, like, he's like making deals for companies that he does marketing for, and he's not taking any of the money. He's just like, hey, I just want to help out my client because that makes them see how loyal I am to them, and I believe in their product. So I have got nothing there.
His passion, and I've worked with Luke before too on the media side of stuff, just us collaborating and stuff like that, and his insight and his artistic eye to portray an image or capture an image. I'm sorry, not portray an image. He's literally capturing it is incredible. It's hands down like some of the best work I've seen.
Well, he was here with me. Yeah, he was here with me in
really?
Ukraine, and he went to Kyiv, and he was in a lot of our meetings, and he brought so much to the table because he was special forces. He did and he did a bunch of other stuff. I mean, he did something like 22. Deployments to Afghanistan. He had worked with the special forces throughout this entire region. So he really understood a lot of context to the problem set here. And those are the kinds of guys we're looking for. I'm trying to rope him in more. I mean, this guy's a CEO of a really successful business. I'm trying to get him to be like more part of my team. I was like, don't volunteer on anything else. Just volunteer with me. But he's so amazing. and yeah, they're just really helping us out.
That's great. Before we jump off here, let's go ahead and share your website again. I don't know if you guys have any social pages or anything but where people can connect with you and what the addresses are and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's freedomresearchfoundation.org, so that's pretty easy. And then, of course, we've got LinkedIn. We've got like a foundation page, and then I have my page, so you can reach out to through either one of those. And CMG, Clandestine Media Group, is doing our social media, but they literally just started. So, yeah.
Great. No, super excited that they're on board with you guys too. I think that'll be super helpful. So, well, listen, Brandon, like I said, I'd love to do this again. Maybe the next one we can do in person. Are you scheduled to come back anytime soon, or are you there for a while?
No, I will be. We're going to have a team on the ground. We've been funded for 6 months to do our work here, so I'm really excited about that, and I'm hoping to build on it. So right now I'm just kind of laying the groundwork for that, but I've got a team in Syria. We'll have a team here. We have offices in Poland and offices in Iraq. So, and we're being asked to go to new places already in Africa and other areas in the Middle East. So it's expanding quickly, and yeah, I'm definitely next time what state are you in?
I'm in Colorado, so I live very close to Luke.
Right.
So I'm in the mountains,
awesome.
just 30 minutes from him or so.
Well, next time I visit him, I'm sure we'll have more to talk about because I've been a couple different places, and we can do it again.
Absolutely. I feel like we could do multiple hours with you. So I appreciate your time. Stay safe out there. And thank you again for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Mountainside Podcast. If you haven't had a chance to do this already, please take a moment, follow, like, subscribe, or rate on whatever platform you catch the Mountainside Podcast at. Also, if you'd like some more information on upcoming episodes, safety tips, access to all of our affiliates, and all the badass discounts that we get here at the Mountainside Podcast, check out themountainsidepodcast.com. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Uncanna CBD. Uncanna has been an incredible sponsor here at the Mountainside Podcast. And to be even more incredible, for this month only, they are offering Mountainside listeners 25% off every product at Uncanna CBD for a limited time. So whether you're looking for a full spectrum, broad spectrum, or isolate, this is the month to get it. Simply by visiting uncanna.com and using the promo code TMS at checkout. That's an incredible give back and a thank you to the Mountainside listeners from Uncanna. It's very simple to take advantage of this. All you have to do is visit uncanna.com or open the show notes and look for the Uncanna link. At checkout, use promo code TMS and you're going to save 25%. We are also brought to you by Onnit. Onnit is an amazing company based right here in the USA, helping humans reach peak performance mentally and physically. Listen, this is not just another supplement company with the same old, same old. Onnit's diverse lineup of products and supplements are backed by science and research, and that's what truly makes this company so amazing. Onnit offers supplements to help sports performance, energy levels, your mood, sleep, brain function, focus, immune system, digestive health, and that's not all. Onnit also has amazing fitness programs, equipment, apparel, and you can now save 10% on all of it. Just visit onnit.com, that's ONNIT.com, and use the promo code TMS at checkout to receive 10% off your entire order. There's nothing I love more than supporting America, showing my patriotism, and buying 100% American-made products. Origin Maine is one of the only companies that I found out there that makes an incredible product that's 100% designed, produced, grown, built, and manufactured right here in the USA. So if you're looking for 100% American-made boots, high-quality denim, jiu-jitsu gis, rash guards, hoodies, bags, Jocko Clean Energy Fuel, supplements, and much more, look no further than originmaine.com. If you want to support the U.S. economy, the U.S. workforce, then you can 100% trust Origin and the amazing people that are running this company. And because they are a sponsor of the Mountainside Podcast, you as a listener can truly reap the benefits of buying American-made products at a discount. All you have to do is simply use promo code TMS at checkout, and you will receive 10% off your entire order every time that you visit originmaine.com. Once again, that's promo code TMS, the number 10, TMS10, at originmaine.com.